The grand hall of the palace was alive with laughter and music. Candles flickered, throwing golden light across the high ceilings and the polished marble floor. The nobles wore rich fabrics, glittering jewels, and proud smiles. The air smelled of wine, roses, and roasted meat. It was a night of celebration, yet the shadows seemed longer than usual, as if the palace itself held a secret. Among the crowd moved a young maid. Her dress was simple, her hands clean but small and nimble. She carried herself with quiet grace, moving carefully so as not to draw attention. Her hair was dark and smooth, her eyes deep with thought. She went from table to table, refilling glasses, carrying trays of food, and bowing politely to the nobles who hardly noticed her. Her name was Leora. She had been in the palace for many months, yet she always felt invisible. Yet tonight something in her felt different. A strange tension hung in the air, something she could not name. The nobles were careless with their laughter. Glasses clinked too loudly, voices rose in merriment, and someone accidentally knocked over a crystal goblet. Wine spilled dark and red across the floor, and it ran in a small river to Leora's feet. Before she could step aside, the wine splashed across her dress, leaving a dark, spreading stain. The nobles froze for a moment, then burst into laughter. "Look at her," one shouted. "A little mouse in a sea of wine." "Did she think she could serve without a single mistake?" another sneered. They pointed and laughed harder. Leora felt her cheeks burn. She bent down to clean the wine with a cloth, but her hands trembled. She had faced insults before, yet this time a strange heat rose in her chest. She did not shout. She did not cry. She simply held her head high and continued her work. But inside, something had awakened. From across the hall, someone was watching. A man dressed in black stood in the shadows near the balcony. His presence was quiet but commanding. Nobles avoided looking at him, as if some instinct warned them of danger. He had dark hair, sharp eyes, and an aura of strength that made the air itself feel heavier. His name was Darian, the leader of a powerful clan that few dared to challenge. Some whispered that he was a myth, a shadow who brought justice in ways that people did not always understand. Darian's gaze fell on Leora. He noticed how she did not cry, how she did not beg, how she carried herself even as the nobles mocked her. Something about her caught his attention, a spark, a quiet courage that few possessed. The nobles, unaware of who was watching, continued their laughter. "You should see her face," one said, waving his glass in the air. Another spilled more wine by accident, splashing it onto her sleeve. Leora's hands were steady as she cleaned it, but the room seemed to grow colder, as if a storm had passed through. Darian moved closer, his presence unseen by the crowd. The nobles suddenly felt uneasy, though they could not say why. A shadow fell across the table, dark and immense. One of them dared to look up. It was the eyes that froze them, dark, piercing, and cold, yet with a strange fire burning within. Darian's reputation for vengeance was known, though few had seen him in person. His silence spoke louder than any words. The laughter died slowly, replaced by nervous whispers. "Is that him?" someone asked. Darian's eyes did not leave Leora. He stepped forward, his movement smooth and certain, and the crowd parted instinctively. The nobles felt a sudden weight on their chests, as if the air itself had grown thick. When he reached the table, he leaned slightly and looked at the men who had spilled the wine. His voice was low, calm, and controlled, yet it carried a threat deeper than any blade. "You find it amusing," he said, "to humiliate someone who serves with dignity." The nobles laughed nervously. "It was an accident, just a little wine, nothing more." "Nothing more?" Darian interrupted, his eyes sharp like knives. "Nothing more? You think disrespect is nothing? You think power gives you the right to crush someone beneath your feet?" The room fell silent. Even the music had stopped somewhere far away. Leora's hands froze mid-motion, but she did not look at Darian. She only glanced at him from the corner of her eye. The tension was strange, almost magnetic. For the first time, she did not feel invisible. Darian straightened and spoke again. "Some debts," he said, "are not paid with coins or favors. Some debts are paid with understanding. Some hearts, with fear, respect, or courage." The nobles paled. They realized that they were not dealing with a simple man, but with a force of nature, a figure whose presence alone demanded obedience. Leora felt something stir in her chest. A mixture of fear, yes, but also curiosity. She had never been noticed like this. The words he spoke felt like a promise, and something in her responded to it. She wondered what it meant, and whether she would ever find out. Darian's gaze lingered on her, quiet yet intense. He spoke again, this time to her alone. "Some are born to serve," he said softly, "but some are born to change destinies." Leora's breath caught. She did not respond, but she felt it deep inside, a connection, strange and powerful, as if her life had shifted in an instant. The nobles, sensing that they were no longer the center of attention, began to retreat. Their pride had left them. The laughter was gone, replaced by whispers of fear and uncertainty. Darian did not look at them. He turned his full attention to Leora. The hall seemed to grow quieter around them, the candles flickering as if aware of the tension between them. The smell of wine was replaced by something heavier, anticipation, a strange promise of events yet to come. "You will not be harmed," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "if you choose to stand with courage. But remember." He leaned closer, so only she could hear. "Some debts are more than money, and some hearts are more than steel." The words lingered in the air long after he moved away. Leora's hands shook slightly, but she did not lower her head. She felt different, stronger. A strange fire had been lit inside her, one she could not yet understand. The nobles, now far away, whispered nervously among themselves. They realized they had crossed a line they could not undo. Fear had replaced arrogance, and their power felt fragile. Darian disappeared into the shadows again, leaving only a sense of presence as if he were everywhere at once. Leora remained still for a moment, her heart racing. Something in her had changed. She had been noticed, and in that noticing, a new destiny had begun. The candles flickered one last time, throwing strange shadows across the walls. The feast continued, but the laughter was gone, replaced by a tension that lingered like a storm on the horizon. And in that quiet, Leora knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Something powerful had awakened, not just in the palace, but in herself. She could not yet understand what it meant, only that her life, her fate, and her heart had been touched by a force greater than anything she had ever known. The nobles would regret their arrogance, the palace would whisper their shame, and the young maid, the maid would discover the strength that had always been hidden inside her. Outside, in the balcony shadows, Darian's eyes watched the night sky. The stars reflected in his dark gaze, sharp and intense. A storm was coming, and it would change everything. For him, for her, and for those who had dared to spill the wine. And somewhere deep in his heart a thought lingered. The reckoning has begun, and she will be at the center of it. The palace had grown quiet after the feast, yet the night seemed far from over. In the heart of the city, hidden behind tall stone walls, lay a mansion that few knew existed. It was Darian's domain, a place both magnificent and secretive. Torches burned along winding paths, casting flickering light over statues that seemed alive in the shadows. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and earth, mixed with a faint perfume that seemed to follow those who entered. Leora had never been inside a place like this. When Darian had summoned her after the feast, she felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. The doors were enormous, carved with symbols she could not understand. Guards, silent as statues, moved like shadows along the walls. Inside the mansion was a labyrinth of halls, high ceilings, and staircases that twisted in unexpected ways. Paintings of ancestors, their eyes sharp and knowing, lined the walls. Candles glowed softly, casting a warm but mysterious light. The palace of her own life now felt distant, as if she had stepped into a dream, or a story from the old legends. Darian led her through the halls, silent and commanding. Leora's steps echoed on the polished floors. She noticed that he did not speak much, yet every movement he made seemed to guide her, protect her and yet test her at the same time. Finally, they reached a wide room where the air felt different, heavier, almost alive. The offenders from the feast were already there, their confidence gone, replaced by unease. They looked around the mansion, realizing too late that they had entered a world far beyond their power. Darian's eyes swept over them, calm but sharp. He did not shout. He did not raise his hand. He only looked, and the nobles felt the weight of their actions like a chain around their necks. "Tonight," Darian said softly, "you will learn that arrogance has consequences, that power alone does not protect you. That fear, respect, and courage, these are currencies far greater than gold." The offenders tried to laugh, weak and nervous, but it died quickly. Leora stood quietly to the side, watching the scene unfold. She felt a strange thrill. For the first time, she was not a bystander. She was part of the moment, part of a power far greater than herself, yet it was hers to touch if she dared. Darian stepped closer to the nobles. "I will not harm you as some expect," he said. "But tonight, you will face truths about yourselves that you have long avoided." He turned to Leora, and the room seemed to grow still. "And you," he said, "you will see that courage is more than standing still. It is knowing when to act, and when to trust." Leora's heart quickened. She had never felt a tension like this, never felt the weight of another person's gaze so strongly. It was not fear that filled her now, but a strange mixture of curiosity and determination. She wanted to understand this man, this power, and the strange pull she felt toward it. The nobles were ordered to sit at the far end of the room. One by one, Darian asked questions that seemed simple, yet cut deeper than any sword. He asked about their past, about choices they had made, about the moments when they had failed to see others' pain. The offenders squirmed, realizing that each word he spoke held a mirror to their own faults. Leora noticed the subtle changes in Darian. His voice, calm and controlled, occasionally softened when he looked at her. His eyes lingered, not with impatience or command, but with something she could not name. Respect, curiosity, something older, deeper, and quieter than mere interest. As the night unfolded, Leora found herself stepping forward at key moments. A noble tried to lie, to escape responsibility. She spoke quietly but with sharp clarity, pointing out truths they had tried to hide. Her voice carried weight. Darian's gaze followed her, and she realized she had his full attention. "You have courage," he said quietly, when no one else could hear, more than most would believe. "Do not hide it." Leora felt warmth at his words. She had never been praised before. She had never been noticed like this, and yet it did not feel like flattery. It felt like acknowledgement, like someone had finally seen the strength inside her all along. The nobles, meanwhile, began to crumble under the weight of their own guilt and fear. Darian did not need to raise his hand. His presence alone was enough. Leora watched as their arrogance faded, replaced by unease, confusion, and the beginnings of understanding. Later, they were led to the garden. Rain had begun to fall lightly, washing the marble paths with silver light. Torches burned along the edges, casting dancing shadows across the wet stone. The offenders were told to confront their actions not with violence but with honesty. They stumbled, whispered, and faltered, realizing that some truths were impossible to escape. Leora stayed close to Darian, walking beside him along the stone paths. Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Why not punish them and be done with it?" Darian's eyes, dark and stormy, met hers. "Because vengeance without understanding is empty," he said. "Because power without guidance is dangerous. And because some souls need someone to see their truth or they will be lost forever." Leora's heart thudded. She felt a strange connection, as if his words were meant for her as much as for the nobles. She realized that she was learning from him, not just about power but about courage, justice, and the strength that comes from quiet honesty. The rain fell heavier now, and the torch's light shimmered across the garden. A noble attempted to flee, thinking he could escape the night's lessons. Darian moved silently, catching him with a soft yet unstoppable force. The noble fell to his knees, gasping, and Leora felt a chill run down her spine. The power Darian wielded was real yet controlled. It was not meant to destroy but to teach. Leora's eyes met Darian's, and in that moment she understood something profound. She was no longer just a maid. She had a role to play, a presence that mattered. She could influence outcomes, save others, and stand with someone who wielded immense power, with a sense of justice and mercy. The night grew deeper, and the storm outside raged louder. Thunder rolled across the sky and lightning flashed, illuminating the mansion and garden in brief white bursts. In one of those flashes, Leora saw the nobles fully humbled, their arrogance stripped away. They would remember this night for the rest of their lives. Darian stepped close to her again. "You have done well," he said softly. "More than well. You have chosen courage over fear, truth over convenience. Remember this, some paths are not meant to be walked alone, but some paths are meant to be shared." Leora's breath caught. She did not speak. She could not yet find words for the strange mix of fear, excitement, and longing that filled her chest. The nobles, now silent and trembling, were finally sent away. Darian led Leora back inside the mansion. The hall seemed warmer now, softer, as if acknowledging her presence. She realized that this night had changed everything. She was no longer invisible. She had been noticed, tested, and found worthy. They reached a quiet chamber high above the rest of the mansion. Darian looked at her, and for a long moment neither spoke. The storm raged outside, but inside there was a calm tension, like the pause before a song begins. "You have strength," Darian said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Not just courage, strength, and soon. You will need it. The world outside these walls is not kind to those who shine." Leora nodded, her heart beating fast. She had no idea what he meant, but she trusted him. Something in his presence, in his words, felt like a promise that she was no longer alone, that her life had purpose, and that she was about to be part of something greater than herself. Darian turned toward the balcony. Rain streaked the glass. Lightning illuminated the clouds, and the night seemed alive with secrets. "The night is only beginning," he said. "And the shadows, they have only just begun to dance." Leora felt a shiver run down her spine. The world she had known, the life she had lived, felt distant and small. She was stepping into a story far larger, far darker, and far more beautiful than she could have imagined. And she was not afraid for the first time in her life. Leora felt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And somewhere deep in the mansion, Darian's eyes watched her, sharp and knowing, yet filled with a new emotion. Something soft, rare, and dangerous. A feeling he had long denied, yet could not hide any longer. The storm outside raged on, but inside the mansion, a new storm had begun, one of hearts of courage, and of shadows dancing in the night. And as the rain fell harder, Leora realized that her life would never be the same. She had been noticed, tested, and chosen. The real story, the story of power, of trust, and of hearts meeting in the dark, was only beginning. The storm had passed, but the night was far from quiet. Rain still dripped from the eaves of the mansion, and the garden paths were slick with water. Lightning had faded, leaving only the pale light of the moon reflecting on wet stone. Yet the tension in the air was thicker than ever. Leora stood at the edge of the garden, her dress damp from the rain. Her dark hair clung to her face, and her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. She had grown stronger in the days since the feast. She had learned courage, insight, and patience. Yet tonight would test her in ways she could never have imagined. The offenders from the feast had not forgotten their shame. Some had tried to flee, some had sought allies, and others had plotted revenge. They underestimated Darian, but more importantly, they underestimated Leora. She was no longer the quiet maid who had endured spilled wine. She had become a force of her own, a presence that could shift events with calm precision. Darian stood beside her, his figure tall and commanding. Even in the pale moonlight, his dark eyes seemed to pierce the shadows. He did not speak, yet his presence filled the garden, protective and powerful. Leora felt a strange warmth in knowing he was there, yet she also knew that he trusted her to act, to make choices, and to shape the night's events. Suddenly, movement at the far edge of the garden caught her attention. The offenders had gathered, their faces twisted with anger and fear. One of them, braver or perhaps more foolish than the rest, stepped forward. "You cannot stop us," he shouted. "We will not be humiliated by a woman in a shadow." Darian's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He said nothing. He simply watched, his calm presence radiating strength. But it was Leora who stepped forward first. Her voice was quiet but carried through the rain-soaked garden like a bell. "Enough," she said firmly. "Your power means nothing here. Your arrogance has no place in this moment. If you want respect, then earn it. If you want peace, then show honesty. Otherwise, leave now." The words struck the offenders with an unexpected force. They blinked in surprise, realizing that the quiet maid, the one they had mocked, had become a figure of authority. Darian's presence amplified her words, but it was her courage that made them falter. One noble tried to draw a dagger, desperate to reclaim pride, but a shadow moved faster than the eye could follow. Darian was there, silent, and the weapon clattered harmlessly to the wet stone. Leora's heart raced, but she did not flinch. She had expected danger, and now she faced it with clarity and calm. "You see," Darian said softly, his voice carrying to the offenders. "Strength without honor is fragile. Power without wisdom is empty. And cruelty. Cruelty is its own punishment." The offenders began to crumble, their plans dissolving under the combined weight of Darian's authority and Leora's courage. Confession replaced defiance, humility replaced arrogance. They admitted their mistakes, their failures, and the truths they had long denied. Leora watched carefully. She guided the conversation with gentle firmness, helping the offenders face themselves. She realized that this night was not about punishment alone. It was about transformation. Some would leave humbled, some wiser, and some forever changed. As the final noble lowered his head in acceptance, Leora felt a strange calm wash over her. She had acted with courage, insight, and fairness. She had stepped fully into her own power. Darian moved closer to her, his expression unreadable, yet softer than she had ever seen. "You have done more than I expected," he said. "You have not only faced fear, you have inspired courage. That is rare, even among the strongest." Leora's breath caught. She had never heard such praise, never felt such acknowledgement. It was as if the weight of years of invisibility had been lifted in a single moment. She had become part of something greater, something meaningful. The storm had left the garden wet and glimmering under the moonlight. Shadows shifted and danced, reflecting the lessons of the night. Leora looked at Darian, and for the first time she felt the full depth of their connection. It was not just admiration. It was understanding, trust, and something older, quieter and stronger than words could describe. Suddenly, a movement at the edge of the garden drew her attention again. A figure approached, cautious, unsure. It was one of the nobles who had truly learned humility. He knelt on the wet stone before them, bowing deeply. I understand now," he said. "I was wrong, and I am sorry. You have shown me courage, wisdom, and mercy. I will never forget it." Darian nodded slightly, and Leora felt a strange pride. She had guided the transformation, yet she knew she did not act alone. Darian had given her strength, presence, and belief. Together they had shaped the night, changed the arrogant, and restored balance. The garden fell silent once more, the rain having stopped entirely. The moon reflected on the wet stones, casting long, gentle shadows. Leora looked at Darian. "It's over," she whispered. Though she did not feel the same calm that comes at the end of a story. She knew the night had changed her, but she also sensed that the world beyond this garden was vast, full of challenges yet unseen. Darian's gaze softened as he looked at her. "No," he said, "it is never truly over. The world will always test those who are brave, those who choose courage, and those who walk in the light of understanding. But you have proven that you are ready." Leora's heart quickened. She felt the weight of those words, their promise, and the quiet power they carried. She realized that she was not only strong, but she was also seen, valued, and recognized. She had faced fear, inspired courage, and now stood at the edge of a new beginning. The mansion behind them was quiet, yet alive with shadows that whispered secrets. Darian extended his hand, and Leora hesitated for a moment before taking it. The contact was simple, yet it carried a weight of trust, respect, and connection that neither of them had experienced before. "You have chosen well," Darian said softly, "and together we will face whatever comes next." For the first time, Leora felt not just courage, but belonging. She had stepped into a world of shadows, power, and possibility. She had been tested, guided, and transformed. And in the presence of Darian, she understood that strength could coexist with tenderness, that justice could coexist with mercy, and that two hearts, brave and true, could meet even in the darkest of nights. The offenders were gone, their arrogance humbled, their lessons learned. The mansion was silent, the storm outside passed, yet inside a new story had begun. It was not a story of power alone, but of connection, courage, and hearts that had chosen to trust each other. Leora looked up at Darian, and in the moonlight, she saw not just the shadow of a powerful man, but a person who could see, understand, and value her. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the bond between them had changed both of them forever. Darian's hand tightened slightly on hers, and he spoke again, quiet but firm. The night has been won, but the world beyond will still test us. Be ready, stand strong, and nope, you are never alone. Leora nodded, her heart full of determination, courage, and a strange, quiet joy. She had been a maid, unnoticed and quiet. But now she was something else. A force of her own, guided by courage and insight, ready to face whatever the future held. The moon shone brightly, reflecting on the wet stones of the garden. Shadows moved gently with the breeze, whispering secrets of power, justice, and the bonds of hearts that had met in darkness and emerged stronger. Leora and Darian stood together, a quiet team, two souls shaped by courage, understanding, and the strange magical pull of destiny. And as the first light of dawn touched the edges of the mansion, they both knew that life would never be the same again. The world outside awaited, full of challenges and surprises, but they were ready. Together they had survived fire and storm. Together, they had found strength, courage, and trust. And together, they would face the future unbroken and unafraid.